ahead and get started. And since we all met each other, I would just second what Steve said and raise a glass to Ted for the generous donation to the college and the fabulous wines. We're really enjoying the wine. So cheers to you, Ted. Thank you so much. So Ted has been the winemaker for T.R. Elliott, the T.R. Elliott label, and not only has donated to us, but has done some generous donations with other institutions as well, with Stanford and others. And Ted's been in the industry for quite a while and has great stories, as I'm sure that we will hear tonight. Ted started out at, well, I guess you did. Did you start at Carmenet, Ted? Was that?
Yes, that was, well, I might, yeah, that was the name. No, I think it still may exist as Carmenet, but that's where I landed when that was an exciting adventure. But yes, Carmenet was the first, after that was the first winery that I was founder of. Yeah.
Okay, great. And they were bought by Chalone, is that right?
Yeah, right.
Okay. And then you went on to Sonoma-Cutrer and wore, I guess, every single hat.
Right. I was hired as general manager and fired as soon as Sonoma-Cutrer sold to the big guys.
Okay. When Brown Foreman.
So that's a sure way to get out of a job.
And then on to Emeritus, where you are still the CFO today. So,
yeah,
and
this has been well, I've been very fortunate in my career in this county, and I don't have I have pretty typical view. I love local. That's one thing I love about this business, is how local it is, and I may represent that pretty well. Every one of those companies is a Sonoma County company.
Yes, yeah. Well, and you have great, like I said, great stories and great knowledge of so many industry pioneers in the modern Sonoma County wine industry. So I'll say welcome to iPad 10 that you've joined us. We don't see you, but welcome. We're just getting started. So Ted, with that, why don't we turn it over to you then and start out by talking about Sonoma County versus Burgundy and all the aspects. Ted is going to talk a little bit about what's grown, the climate, the soil, the farming differences in Sonoma versus Burgundy in France. So Burgundy, of course, being in some people's mind the ultimate Pinot Noir in the world, though I think we're giving them a run for their money. But certainly the home of the modern, since the 1500s, home of Pinot Noir. So, yeah. All right, Ted, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, of course, and I'm pleased to have been part, and I hope to stay part of I have to say I've had as much benefit from the junior college as I've given. We've attended classes from A to Z and never disappointed by the professor or his ability to convey the message. So good staff. I mean, it's a great local resource. So for that, those of you that are with the JC should feel pretty proud. I think there might be only one other JC in the United States that comes anywhere near close the quality of the Santa Rosa one. There's one out in Florida, and I can't remember why. I read about it every now and then. But the Santa Rosa is pretty amazing. This JC is top in the country. It's such a pleasure to have it in our backyard. And I've been very proud to be part of it.
So thank you.
I think that, well, deserved, and more than, I wish I could express that better, but we're very lucky in this community. So I think in what I would like to do, my talk is kind of a reflection of years of thinking about and being told what the first thing I heard was there are three legs on a stool that make up good winemaking. You have to have a good climate, you have to have good soil, and good farming techniques. So I thought I'd give you a general overview of at least what I can of those three areas. Then we can get more specific with the 17 vintage. So in the Well, one of the interesting differences really between Burgundy and Sonoma County is the how, if you look at Burgundy, Burgundy is known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We look at Sonoma County, and the list is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, also Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and Syrah. Quite a big, that'll tell us something right away about the two areas. Because this is going to tell us a little bit about the climate, why Sonoma County can grow all those grapes and Burgundy can't or doesn't. That might go back, as you mentioned earlier, to 400 years of history, and many of those varietals didn't exist or nobody knew about them. So in the climate, Burgundy is cooler. That kind of the main thing to remember. If we're trying to make wine, or especially Pinot Noir, and we're trying to compare it to Burgundy, their average summer temperature is 5 degrees colder than ours, and their average winter is 5 degrees colder. So Californians have the luxury of dealing with riper fruit, and that's going to go all the way through. It'll affect everything. That climate, our climate in Sonoma County, being warmer, allows us to do a lot of things that are not available to a colder climate. So that's the main thing in climate, is the temperature differences. Their climates are called in both places oceanic and semi-continental. So that description covers both. So on paper, that they're the same. But if you start looking behind the scenes at average temperatures, for example, Burgundy has cold winters and frequent snowfalls. Well, I don't think we've seen a lot of snowfall, at least where grapes are grown. So you have to remember there's a dip, that 5 degrees is fairly critical to the grape and to how we use the grape. The soil, the next topic, I'm quite impressed with how close in size Burgundy at 74,000 acres and Sonoma County at 60,000 acres are very good comparisons to show the energy, the size, the number of families that will be involved. All that is very similar. And I think that leads to a lot of similarities because families can stay involved and that sort of thing at that size. The soil difference is quite different. In Burgundy, limestone is the main soil, and in Sonoma County, the grapes grow all well in Goldridge. And I think all of the Schoen farm is primarily Goldridge as well. Those two soil types, is it? I mean, I think it is.
Unfortunately, we're that little knoll on which the farm sits is not Goldridge.
Okay.
So yeah, if you go just south, the Laguna Ridge is Goldridge soil, but we're not right there at the farm.
Well, so if I talk about Goldridge soil, I'm not sure how why in the farms I worked on, we often liked Goldridge soils because of when we would go through those Goldridge soils, they had come from the Sierra Mountains 10,000 years ago through a long process of floods and that sort of thing. They finally reached Sonoma County, and there were a lot of crustaceans and things in them that added, this is a story we used to tell, that would add a little bit of minerality, which is a big word in Europe. And I'm sure that Schoen Farm, whatever your soil type is, you couldn't have avoided some of those events that took place on the west coast of the United States during that time to influence what was in the soil that would eventually influence the flavors of the wine. So even though it's not Goldridge, I think we'll see that many of the attributes of Schoen Farm as one particular farm or any of the big farms is that over the years, a lot of those soils have taken a long time to get here from the Sierra, and they carried with them everything that they dragged along, which included very crustaceous creatures, and that's sort of a way to connect to minerality. And the farming side, very different in many ways between Burgundy and Sonoma County. And that's primarily because the Burgundians sort of had followed the idea that every kid would get their equal share of a plot of land. So it means, and with your idea that they're 500 years old, just imagine how many generations have had to divide up a piece of property. It's incredible how quickly you find, instead of owning a 100-acre vineyard, you own about 4 rows. So the farming is very, very different because it's focused. A family might have to argue about 4 rows of a vineyard instead of 400 rows. So the farming is often influenced by family exchanges about what's right to do. And Sonoma County doesn't have to worry about that quite so much. So you have that idea. Those are 2 great ideas to think about. One, a small family sounds interesting until you get an idiot in it and they don't know what they're doing. Sounds good until they cut so many costs that they don't get the flavors there anymore. But so the small family groups versus sort of larger organizations is a big thing to think about in the vineyard practices between Burgundy and Sonoma County. Also, because of their cooler weather in Burgundy, their yields are slightly lower, not as much as they'd like to tell us, but at least the data I've looked at for this talk, 4 to 6 tons per acre would be pretty average in Burgundy, and Sonoma County, 5 to 7 tons an acre. To the outsider, that's not that, is almost equivalent. So the yields are very close. In the farming techniques, that has a lot, when you have to farm according to your yields, as how many workers it takes to go through and that sort of stuff. So I think the farming, I would say, the biggest difference has to do with the number of owners controlling the decision. A lot in Burgundy and not so much in California. And there's pluses and minuses to both of them. So that's kind of and that's my first sort of overview of comparing those 2 regions.
That's great. And I'd love to hear you talk about the different vineyards here and give us a little more background on all, I guess all 3, because we have the Pratt Chardonnay, the Bootleggers Hill Chard and Pinot, and then the O'Connell Pinot.
Right. So they are, those 3 vineyards are pretty representative. Bootleggers, all 3 of them would have foggy days. You'd be foggy until 10 or 11, and then the fog or the sunshine comes through for a little bit. The Bootleggers is much higher in elevation than the others. Bootleggers about 800 feet, and the O'Connell and Pratt are both about 300 feet. And I might be a little bit, I think Bootleggers might be a little higher. But as you think about the fog burning off, it's going to burn off of Bootleggers last because it's highest. So it's going to wind up with a microclimate that is cooler than the ones that are a few hundred feet lower. And that's going to affect a lot down the road. So the elevation does make a difference. And that's a long way to get there, and not a lot of students would care, but that's what happens. If you have a foggy climate, it's going to be cooler. So the Bootleggers is the highest, and it will always have more fog. O'Connell and Pratt are practically neighbors. I think you know both those vineyards. I'm speaking that to Kevin. But both O'Connell and Pratt, they're in kind of rolling hills at 300 feet elevation. They too have foggy summers and cool ocean breezes, but often they won't be. They'll be slightly warmer than Bootleggers. But
where is Pratt exactly, Ted?
On the drive out to Sebastopol, about 2/3, almost at the edge of Sebastopol, there's Irwin Lane. Don't know if you may have seen Pratt's on Irwin Lane.
Okay.
Pratt, I mean, practically owns most of Irwin Lane. I mean, Pratt's a very big farmer.
Right. I knew there were many locations.
And I think you know Pratt's, well, Pratt's a very, and Pratt, Jim Pratt, what I like about all these relationships that I have with vineyards is that I've known all of the proprietors for quite a long time. Jim Pratt worked for one of the greatest families in our county, as you know. And when he was he was growing things inside greenhouses.
That was with the Cundys, with Rich Cundy. Uh-huh.
Right. So Jim Pratt learned farming from the top. I mean, I don't think the Cundy family in their enterprises really fail at anything, but they are very good at the wine stuff. So Jim Pratt liked, he took everything to heart and he practiced it. So he got out of the greenhouse business and started growing his own vineyards. And he's a very good supplier to quite a few Sonoma County. I was tiny. That little story, when I wanted to get in the Chardonnay business, he was my first choice because of one of the winemakers I worked with at Sonoma-Cutrer. And Jim took the time to meet with us and said, here's 4 rows out of his 4,000 that he felt. That's because he just felt that's what he should do. Here's a small winemaker, and small winemakers think this way. So Jim walked me around and he said, you can have any one of these rows and I'll farm them differently for you if you want me to. And we didn't ask him that. I'll do that if you want. So that's just a good farmer, I'd say, taking it. He wouldn't have been insulted if I'd said, do it this way or do it. I'm not sure he would have done it really. I never challenged him on it. I think you've been doing a pretty good job. And I didn't want to wanted him to farm it because he'd had such a good reputation. So Jim Pratt and Dan O'Connell. Well, Dan O'Connell was the first relationship I had. That was a pretty lucky find on my part. There were several. Dan has a wonderful location. He and his family have been living in this county for a long time, several generations. And he planted some vineyards, a very small amount. And he and I worked together quite a lot as he wanted to find out whether he should be a farmer or to lounge on the family land that he had. He kind of got into being a farmer. Although later times, as we talked about before this show, what happens to many outcomes you don't know when you start. The consuming public found out about Dan O'Connell's house and his ability and the idea of leaving San Francisco and getting married at Dan O'Connell's house has changed Dan's views a lot. Not that he isn't still a great farmer, but he has to pay a lot of attention now to his views and his custom. It's just a different thing and I think it must happen to everybody. Burgundy must be the same. People come and tramp around, want to see things, and you're sort of distracted from farming a little bit. But Dan when I was working with him, we knew every single row, and we could see the soil change. He had seen that too, because he's on a little bit of a slope. You go down the slope and you'll see soil changes. And he was very aware of that, very aware of where the bugs were. But he really got into farming, and that really helped me understand the farmer. He was so helpful with that. And so Jim Pratt was both though from different ways. Jim Pratt, because he'd been with the Cundys, Dan, because he had the drive to have a small vineyard, and the Bootleggers group, quite different, really. Those were 3 of us. That's the last adventure for me. Bootleggers was kind of a wonderful combination of a wine farmer, Charlie Chenoweth, and I was fortunate enough to hook up with a great winemaker, Michael Brown. And that was a huge adventure, knowing a great farmer and someone who was probably the world's best known winemaker, Michael Brown. He had a huge reputation, still does. He has his own product. So I was pretty lucky in my introduction towards bootleggers to work with the best that I thought existed, or good examples of the best, I guess we could say that.
Did you develop that vineyard from the beginning, from raw land?
Yes.
Okay.
Bootleggers was, nobody wanted to go that far east for farming. And as I think I told you, it was called bootleggers because they had grown, the owner of that land, I think he made most of his money exchanging booze in the Depression era. But he was an apple grower, real. But bootleggers referred to the amount of booze that really transacted up there last century. And it was a romantic story, or not romantic, how you look at it, but it had a nice story to it. All these vineyards had very different stories.
In what year did you develop bootleggers?
Let's see, we started that. It's a 15 or 20-year-old vineyard now.
Okay. Yeah, I wondered. I didn't know how, because I know that you pushed it toward the coast further west than a lot of people thought was reasonable. And I was just wondering how early that was. So.
No, well, yeah, it wasn't. Oh, no, I don't think it's. I think the original plantings are still there now. I haven't been involved as much, but so we probably planted that. I mean, I think it's 20 or 30 years old for grapes.
Okay.
So it's going to be time for that outfit. Now it's owned by a rather big outfit, but they'll have to look at that. But I think we did a very good job planting and setting things up. So from that standpoint, it'll last as long as grapes last, and they get hit by bugs, or they hit by the last thing you think about. But regular age up there should be as long as should be that 20, 30 or 40 years. But I don't think that's just hasn't been the history of what reality.
Uh-huh. Michael Brown, then he, of course, Costa Brown is the label for which he's most famous, I believe. And when they got wine of the year, I believe that was their Gaps Crown Pinot Noir.
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Did any of the bootleggers' fruit go into that wine? Do you know? Or was it pure Gaps Crown? Okay.
I don't know what
okay. All right.
Everything else went into Gaps.
I believe they still get, Costa Brown still gets some Bootleggers Hill fruit, do they not?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
and then Michael Brown's new label is Cirque, I believe.
Cirque, the business part of this, I'm not sure I could only hazard a best guess. When Costa Brown sold, their company went skyrocketing way up there. And the founders sometimes have little to say having to do with the things they love to do, like making wine and growing grapes. Instead, they're on platforms talking to people all the time. So that's now when I think I see Michael Brown has left the big company Costa Brown at some expense to himself, but he's doing all right. And there was a small vineyard next to us at Sonoma-Cutrer, owned by a woman, and she sold her facility to Michael Brown. And I think I think his new brand will be Brown Family Wines.
Okay.
Cirque stayed back with the big company called Costa Brown.
Okay.
Cirque, I love to say this, Cirque is a reference, of course, to the fact that Michael Brown's first jobs were in circuses.
Oh.
Nobody knows. I mean, that's just strange. He never gets asked why he called it Cirque. So I embarrassed him, and he said, well, I used to have a great career in circuses.
What did he do? Do you know?
No, I don't. He loved circuses.
That's great.
That's just an interesting connection, I thought. That's what I like about this business. You meet people that, they they're all a little bit different.
Well, and speaking of that, before we leave Burgundy completely, when you were at Sonoma-Cutrer, I know you had an ongoing dialogue with some of the most famous winemakers in the world from Burgundy who would come here and share information with you, and you would share information with them about Chardonnay primarily. And you have a series of books I know that you produced even about these exchanges. Would you tell us a little bit about how that started, and maybe are there any good stories of interesting people there? I'm sure there are.
Oh yeah, that was a great chapter. When that was kind of a bold move on a California winery spot to say we call that focus on Chardonnay. And I must say the founder of that company, Bryce Jones, I have been proud to work with him for a long time. But he came up with those words, focus on Chardonnay. And you got to think about that for a while. That's just crazy. And to think that it was going to be held in California, that was bizarre. You know, these were just dumb ideas. And all of a sudden, but we put it on. And because I think primarily we had very good contacts with the best Burgundy producers, best Chardonnay producers in Burgundy. And once one said yes, then another would say yes, and another would say yes. So we would get 15 or 20 great. We would have Americans and French discussing Chardonnay in how all these things we're talking about. And it would be a several day event. We had a translator so that either, you know, we have very wonderful support from our staff at the winery and from the Burgundians who came, because it was, yeah, that was a great experience. And it was a turn of the table to think the French would come to California to figure out, to see what we were doing. Some came with a chip on their shoulder, some came with good advice, you know, and they all, I think, were a little bit in awe of how good the wines we were that we could make. Well, that was a great chapter. Thanks for reminding me of that.
And those books are wonderful. And I was lucky enough to be gifted one of the editions. And I assume that they're probably at the Sonoma County Wine Library, though I do not know for sure.
I don't know either.
But they're fun reads.
Yeah.
So if anybody's interested.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, that's really good chapter, I think, in Sonoma County wine history, especially given things like the 1976 Paris tasting, when, you know, we took wines to Paris and didn't, no one expected us to do well, and California wines came out on top, and for reds and whites. And of course, the white was the Chardonnay from Chateau Montelena, but much of the fruit came from the Bacigalupi vineyard here in Sonoma County. So you probably know the Bacigalupi family, I imagine,
yes.
Ted.
It's hard to not know all the good old families like, but I was so, well, when I loved the character of the Italians that moved from San Francisco up here is phenomenal. I mean, as you know, you meet the lady you just talked about, and you'll never forget her. Never. Personality just all over the place.
Yep. She's great. And I know I last saw her at the extravaganza at Schoen Farm. So
great. That's good. And thank you. I'm pleased to hear that.
Now, you talked about acidity, Ted, a little bit, and maybe the difference between climate in Sonoma and Burgundy. And I know you and I talked a little bit about the importance of acidity in wine, and I think that would be great to talk a little bit about, if you'd like, just because of the differences, especially between the Schoen Farm estate Pinot Noir, which is grown in a warmer area, and the bootleggers, for especially, that's grown in a cooler area. So would you mind touching on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I was a little bit because of I think because of listening to the French at that event that you mentioned that we had at Sonoma-Cutrer. I had a predisposition to think that we should pick Chardonnay at low bricks compared to what we could get to, and that was drummed into me. And so low bricks means low sugar, and if you have a low sugar, it can be very tart. And the disadvantage of a wine that is tart is it's going to take longer in the bottle to age to a point where it'll be acceptable with most foods and restaurants and that sort of thing. So it was a bit of a risk, but I, I felt, and so did Sonoma-Cutrer, that picking a bit early would allow more, well, it was a European style. So I can't speak to the science for that. Maybe you'd have to back that up. But we picked just maybe a half a degree less. A lot of at those, there were some times in California history where we were starting to get known for rich, sweet cocktail wines.
Mm.
And I say that I did not like that phase. So while there were many pickers of Chardonnay thinking, let's wait and wait and wait and pick it at 26 or 27 or 28 bricks because you'll have it as a cocktail. It was a quick sell. But I didn't, I wanted to make a food-based wine. So my view was not, because a lot of rich foods compete enormously with chefs. Chefs can't stand that because the flavors are the flavors get chewed up if you have too rich a wine. And so I listened a lot to chefs actually to help think through when to pick the grapes. So I picked them a little bit earlier for that tartness. It eventually mellows out and I think goes better with food. I don't know if I did address that right, the way you wanted.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And then what about the longevity too? I think I can imagine that your wines with a little higher acid are going to be quite long lived.
Oh yeah, in fact, my friends are they're surprised. You have to go again, you have to be confident that that you can go a little bit against the market on release dates. And that's sort of a big deal because what's happened over the same time, digressing, but we were going to talk about how important marketing has become. Actually, the sales and distribution of wine has probably been a major change in the last 10 or 15 years, maybe even more important than some of these factors we're talking about. Because as the distributors want to have high volumes, they pay less attention to what I would have called high quality. And so the high volumes tend to be richer, or they have been. The California consumer was driving this. I'm not sure farmers were or winemakers were, but consumers loved those wines. But the tartness, so the consumers and the distributors the distributors had a huge impact on how wine was grown, I think, because they knew their market. They didn't have the wherewithal to reach the high-end market, if I could be so bold. So the high-end market was never served properly, in my mind, by mass distribution. It's always been better served by the companies or the individuals who have more direct contacts with local restaurants and with local wine stores. That ramble was all about the change, whether I think we've been very fortunate to be able to respond in this county both ways because we have enough weather that we could make a rich wine, and we have the ability to pick it a little bit sooner if we want. I think we're much luckier than Burgundy. We have more choices. They don't have to make a rich wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I think we're a luckier county. In that sense, we stand to gain more.
Yes.
So quite proud of what we've done with that here.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. And your list of varieties is indicative. We can make all those things and do it really well. Yes. Should we open it up to questions? Do others have questions? And just unmute yourself if you'd like to ask something.
So I have a question.
Okay.
In Burgundy, since the temperature is a bit cooler, does that mean that the fruit hangs longer there than it does here? Or do they pick it at a lower bricks? Or what's the impact of that cooler temperature?
Well, I'll give you two things to think about. First of all, the impact of the lower temperatures is they have to pick earlier. They won't get the ripeness. But another factor that we haven't talked about, a weather factor, is that it rains. It rains a lot in Burgundy. And so they have, and we haven't, well, we're in a drought now, but California is kind of blessed. Our rainy season doesn't start generally anytime during the ripening process. So we can let things grow longer. French are crowded out because of rain and because of cold temperatures. Both of those things will affect when they pick, and us too, and and Sonoma County too.
Yeah, I
Does
show
that mean
pictures.
that they're, I'm sorry.
Go
Does
ahead,
that
Bruce.
does that mean their alcohol level is significantly lower?
Yes. Well, I don't know if significant. Well, as Californians have experimented with alcohol levels as high as 15 or 16 or 17. Huge. I got those wrong. Yes, alcohol levels are generally lower in Burgundian wines, and I think that I think someone else could speak to me on the exact alcohol content of these wines, but I would say it's significant.
Marvin, you had a question, I believe.
Going back to the farming techniques, what's the future of mechanical harvesting?
Well, wow, what a good question. I think it's going to come. Mechanical harvesting it's difficult because the French have tools. The French have tractors that are built to manage things like we have, and mechanical harvesting works a lot in lower grade fruits in California, lower grade areas. So many of us that were in the, I would say, high end part of Sonoma County didn't want to talk about mechanical harvesting because some of the charm was all the manual labor that was involved. So now, but all of us, you don't have to go too far to hear a story about whether we're going to have a working force that'll work for the wages that it takes to manually harvest grapes in California. But I think that's written on the wall. There'll be some, every company I've been with has experimented with mechanical harvests and never told the public that they've tried it, but we all do. And I think that's where we're headed, if you want my quick opinion. And I think they're getting very good. It's phenomenal to see the technology that can be attached to a piece of equipment to spot which grape clusters are ripe. It's phenomenal, So and there's some of these things that you say. So California is going to be driven there, as we know. As I just can't imagine there'll be a lot of young American kids that want to work hard outside in the heat.
You're right. It's amazing the technology of those mechanical harvesters. It's a great question, and it's amazing technology. The fruit that comes off of those now looks like blueberries you buy in the store. The red grapes, they're so clean, they look like a little basket of blueberries.
I've seen that. Well, it's been huge. How much
beautiful stuff.
Same with sorting line, all through the system. Technology, we used to have sorting lines ad nauseum, and they had to pay people to differentiate between a blue color and a red color and a black. Now sorting lines are all automated. There's a lot of things going towards automation. You've seen that all, I think, the JC has.
Yes.
Ted, would you mind commenting on dry farm versus non-dry farmed grapes here in Sonoma County? I know Emeritus has been doing a lot of dry farm Pinot Noir, and I'm just curious about your opinion on the trend towards more dry farming of our vineyards.
All right. Well, I think there's my guess is, and I'll have to echo this has been my career too. The dry farming, we're sort of forced into that in California. But if you can successfully dry farm, this was at least the pitch that I think has got a lot of merit to it. the roots of a dry farm vineyard will often be 10 to 15 feet deep. If you have too much irrigation, the vine doesn't work quite as hard and might only be a 5-foot extension. There is a lot of character in the soil, at least in the soils I've worked with, that you miss if the roots aren't challenged to go deeper, which is basically what dry farming will do. So I'm kind of, if you can wait through, you've got to first, most of the commercial places will use drip irrigation to make sure that the vine's roots will be strong. And then it takes a lot of guts, but then you turn off the irrigation. That's the history I've been watching. And I think it does make a more complex wine to have those roots go deeper. That's my take on dry farming. I think it can lead to a more interesting wine. I'd like to ask, well, you're pretty well known in this. What would be your response to that? Do you mind my asking?
You're not there.
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I completely agree with you.
Thank you.
The vines, I think, will respond to the moisture level that they have available. And if they have to reach out a little deeper, they're going to go a little deeper.
Right.
I think a lot of it depends on the soil you're on. Like many of the Gold Ridge soils that you've talked about, are fairly deep, and they will allow root penetration deeper than many soils will.
Yes.
At Schoen Farm, for example, on the Laniger Loam or Laniger Gravelly Loam, which is where most of the vineyards are, there's a fairly heavy, I won't call it a clay pan, but it's a fairly heavy, dense subsoil. So it's going to limit, regardless of the moisture, how deep those roots can actually grow, unless you do some really heavy, deep ripping and break up that compacted zone. So it kind of all goes back to soil, as you pointed out earlier. Soil, climate, and management practices is what's going to determine the quality of the fruit. That's going to determine the quality of the wine.
Right. Thanks for answering. Appreciate that.
Other questions? Well, Ted, I know one of the things, and we've got about 10 more minutes here. During your career in wine, which spans most of the modern era, really, in Sonoma County wine, you've seen lots of changes, I'm sure. What are some of the most significant events that you've seen in your career that have had the biggest impact, either on wine quality or wine style, or just the industry in general and where it's going? Anything really stand out?
Well, yeah, remark a bit on the events. I think the Judgment of Paris event was absolutely a page turner. That was an event that really set up, it changed the world, really. I think that event, there's plenty of books written on that topic, but I had the good fortune of traveling with Burgundy shortly after the Judgment of Paris. It was a ball because, nobody liked Americans after 2 Americans won what was supposed to be a slam dunk for them. And I got to travel with a very well-known, Dick Graff was very well known, and he was a Burgundy fan, very big Burgundy fan. And he was the winemaker at Chalon. And he was a little bit heartbroken that, well, I think he was just a level-headed guy, but it was very interesting to him. And when we went around with him, I had a wonderful trip with him in Burgundy because everybody knew that we were there. We were Americans. We just won this thing. And Dick Graff was divided. He really felt that there was nothing better than Burgundy. And when he wound up being part of an organization that was from California and made very good stuff, that was just a fun story for me to be with him. I also have the good pleasure of traveling with another classmate. There were three or four of us. When I first got in this wine business, I was lucky enough to choose a place to work where some some people know. Josh Jensen was there, for example, and so was Dick Graff. A lot of us, we were tiny, but we all went to the same. It was remarkable. We wound up in the same apartment building, all teaching to each other how to make these small lots. I don't know. I was really blessed to get to know those people.
That you were all in the same apartment building here in California, or when you traveled?
No, sorry. I said that wrong. We rented a place in San Francisco to prepare our businesses. And it was
Oh,
the same building. And at that time, a guy named Draper walked in one day and said, "Hey, mind if I start a little wine tasting room in the basement?" So Dick Graff, Ted Elliott, Josh Jensen would go downstairs, and Draper would put out wine and would give talks to his crowd. He was quite a big boy in making sure Californians succeeded too, as you know.
well, that's Paul Draper from Ridge, right? And they were what, third or fourth or fifth, I think, in the Paris tasting, if I remember right, for their Montebello cab.
Yeah, Ridge was always on the cutting edge.
Yeah,
They were one of my idols.
yeah, they make such great stuff. Here in Sonoma County too. What else, Ted? That's great about the 76 Paris tasting. Any other highlights?
Let's see. Well, I surprised, I have to tell you, another fun story I had was when I was with my wife at a very big event in Healdsburg in 2000 in Healdsburg. I get tired of big events, and I was about out the door when my friend Michael Brown, he was on stage. I assumed he'd won the day. So I was leaving, and Michael Brown had to call me up on the stage and said, "Ted, congratulations. I only got second today."
Because your wine won?
Yes, right.
Ah, fantastic.
I was quite pleased to be on stage with Michael Brown and have him introduce me as the winner. So anyway, that was a highlight. It happens once in a while. That happened once in 30 years or something. But I was quite pleased with that and how well Michael carries himself. Surprised that, my wife's, because we were almost at my car's door when Michael said, "You can't leave yet."
That's fantastic.
There are some wonderful turnarounds in life like that.
Oh, that's great. Well, Steve, I know you have all three wines open. Have you had a chance to taste all three, or are you just sampling one of them so far?
I hope you're not going to ask me to critique them, because I would have to refuse. But I am very, very interested in hearing Ted's comments about these three wines, and they're all excellent. But you can definitely taste the different terroir that are represented in these three wines. So if Ted, if you wouldn't mind commenting on these three, I would find it very, very interesting.
Well, I'll try to remember, but I'd rather have your comments, actually. Well, winemakers get so inbred or so used to a flavor, if you will. So I think if my wines can achieve a sense of terroir, whatever the sense of a place, that's really what I was trying to. And I don't know that consumers can get that, but I used to think when I was preparing wines, any three wines, I'd say, what does that hill look like? Because I tried to describe O'Connell, and the three wines you have must be bootleggers in O'Connell. And then I made a blend once or twice.
The Quest is in there too, yes.
That's right. So I had a blend, Quest, and that was an interesting chapter. I get to choose a brand, and I named it Quest for the idea that I was in searching for the best Pinot. And in this case, bootleggers had a lot of strength. I think I used 5% of bootleggers in O'Connell. O'Connell had great merit all on its own. I just put a dab in there for some richness that came, or something that was different. But Cuesta was always my idea that maybe you could blend, but I was very careful about it. in balance, I've been given a lot of compliments for Quest, which surprised me really, because it wasn't a single vineyard wine. I always picked, Quest was a blend always, but not of more than 2 vineyards, because I've never had a lot of relationships. Well, I don't know if that helps, but I really liked the Quest, the ability, having said all this thing about being pure and all that, I do like the ability to have high quality vineyards. I would keep high standards, but being able to measure little tweaks back and forth by blending from, I don't think I'd blend something outrageous. You know, I wouldn't be a pioneer and mix Chardonnay with Pinot and think I'm going to create something with ice in it that's going to sell to a lot of bar customers. But those have been I've been pretty lucky with what I've seen. I'm quite fortunate.
Quest, I think you're right. In my taste, Ted, it really was multi-layered.
Yeah.
And had so many interesting, complex flavors. So that blending, I think, really paid off. And then you always used really outstanding barrels as well.
Yes.
I believe all French barrels, correct?
Yes, that's quite right. Now, and that was an interesting decision, but I had spent a lot of time on barrels and knowing, well, and then partly French idea. The French had been making, what I liked about the idea of barrels in France was that the French forests were always close to the wineries. And there was a big interchange between winemakers and the storage container.
Hmm.
And I kind of fell to that romance. And I don't remember even if we had good barrel makers in California at the time, or whether the French, I don't think there were a lot of California barrel makers. There were some from other states that were just, I wasn't too interested in oak from, I think it was the Southeast, might have been some up in Minnesota. I just couldn't see it. When the French families had been at this for hundreds of years, I just didn't consider the newbies on the block, even though. So you tell me, how's the American wine barrel business? Is it going on? Is there a good? Are there?
It's going strong now, and the techniques are so different than probably back when you made that decision. I love that. Yeah, you selected the barrels close to the fruit. Back then, there was more of a difference too in the way the barrels were constructed. So now the American barrels get air dry. They get a couple of years of seasoning, for example, instead of kiln drying, and so they're closer in taste profile to the French. But ours are still a lot heavier in spicy flavors. So depending on what you're looking for, but yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
they should frame the wine, not the other way around.
Ah,
Kind of
nice. I didn't mean to sidetrack you from going through the answering Steve's question there. So we talked about the Cuesta, O'Connell and bootleggers. Any other comments on those?
Well, I've been, I think bootleggers was quite a good find for me. And it can stand on its own. It's a bit richer. So I'm pleased with it. Really, I don't see how a single vineyard wine could do better than bootleggers.
I agree.
I believe a little bootleggers boosted O'Connell. I hope Dan's not watching this, but Dan's wines are very nice. But I had to add about 2 or 3% of bootleggers into O'Connell. I don't have to disclose that anywhere except to you guys, because it was not a big blend. But it really helps. So I just took a little bit of spice off the shelf by taking a little bit of bootleggers off the shelf and putting it into O'Connell. O'Connell's wines are wonderful. Don't get me wrong on that, but I was able, I think that's what I liked about blending, was a little tiny fractions on the edge could make such a difference.
Hmm.
That was
Nice.
Yeah, well, I was lucky to have good choices there.
Yeah, fantastic choices. Well, that brings us right up to 8. We talked about going for about an hour. Does anybody have any last minute questions?
It's not a question, Kevin, but you know, as a person who loves Zinfandel, when I moved my mouth over to Pinot Noir, the bootlegger is the one who really rises to the top for me. I like the mouthfeel, I like the fruit, and it's just a very, very pleasant wine to me. I like all three, but I think that my preference would be the bootlegger of these three wines. And so I think that it's just a matter of where you come from. I mean, I come from a place where I like the full-bodied wines that are a little bit fruity, not fruit bombs. I don't want those. I like these because they're all in the mid 13.5% alcohol. So I like the more austere wines. I don't like the 15% Zins, but I like a little bit of fruit. And so that's why I like the bootlegger the best of the
That's
three.
13.9.
But you know, the thing that I've learned tonight that I really like is the Cuesta, the blend that Ted mentioned, because it's Elaine and I bought 2 bottles of each. And so over the last 3 weeks, we've opened up the first 3
We've been drinking.
and we sampled those, and we've kind of thought about which ones we like the best. And now tonight we opened up the other 3, and we're trying to fine tune our palate a little bit. And I have to say that I've become a much bigger fan of Cuesta tonight than I was when I first opened the first bottle. And I think part of that is that I'm much better educated tonight than I was 3 weeks ago when I opened the first bottle. And that's the beauty of education plus experience, you know, produces very positive results. So that's why my hat's off to Ted and Kevin, to you for all you guys are doing to promote SRJC and its wine program, and the students who are going to come through our program and become leaders in the industry over the next 100 years, probably. So my hat's off to you. Thank you very much for putting this together, and I love you all.
Thanks, Steve. That'd be a perfect way to end. I don't know if anybody, Marvin, did you have a comment before? I saw you unmute.
I just echo the comments. That's wonderful. Yeah. We love the JC.
Al, thanks for all your support. And iPad 10, I don't know, you're on mute now if you want to jump in at all. Give you a quick chance here. And no worries, but thanks for joining us. Well, Steve, thanks for those kind words. And Ted, thank you so much for talking to the wine club. Really great. And well, of course, for the wonderful donation of these wines. I hope everybody knows that if you go out there and buy a Bootlegger's Hill from Cirque, it's going to cost you the tidy sum of about $160 a bottle.
Right. Yeah, that's what I forgot to. Yeah, pricing. Must say you are very reasonably priced, and I try. Yeah, you're exactly right. The bootleggers, any other market, bootleggers is over $100.
Right.
Any other market. So you are really being as generous as I've ever heard to your club members.
Well,
I hope it pays off.
I hope so too. Please, everybody, please spread the word. And Steve, I know other people have mentioned too, the mouthfeel of that Bootleggers. It's really winning people over. So hopefully people will discover the good value, and it's going to be a wonderful benefit for the wine program, Ted. So we so appreciate it, and we'll look forward to more interactions like this, hopefully in the near future. And your support of classes has been tremendous too. I know students have said how great it has been to have you in classes.
Well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to that possibility again at the JC.
Good. We will have you back. It might be in this format for a little while.
Right. Well,
but soon we'll be back in person. So
I love the eagerness. When I went to the JC, talked a little bit there, what I really liked was the eagerness of your students. It was very impressive.
It's a great group. Yes. Yeah, we're lucky.
So that group and the club, I'm so pleased to be part of both of them, really.
Well, thanks. All right. Well, with that, why don't we call it a night and wish everyone a great weekend. And thanks everybody for coming on, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Again, Kevin, appreciate your work.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Ted, very much.
Thank you, Steve and Elaine and Pat. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.